Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. I wanted to do a quick video about something that's new and, pretty exciting out of the Glock world, and that is the Glock performance trigger. Um, it's been out, I think, since just before SHOT Show. I think it's been out since maybe January of 2023. I know that it's hard to find them in stock. But I did get my hands on one. In the interest of full disclosure, I didn't pay for this. This was sent to me on essentially a T&E basis, but happy to do it, and I've been pretty pleased with the results. I guess if you don't know me, my name's Tyler Turner. I'm a USPSA Grandmaster in Production Division, Steel Challenge, GM, all that kind of stuff. I guess by way of just establishing my Glock bona fides, and I put that in air quotes, uh, the vast majority of my shooting competitively has been done with a Glock. I've been shooting Glocks, well, yeah, my entire competitive shooting career. I've had a good deal of success with them, and I like Glocks. You know, what can you say? They run, they're accurate for what we do. They fit me really, really well. So I'm a big fan of Glocks. To that end, I've tried just about everything out there in the way of triggers and tuning. Eventually, I learned how to do my own, and for the last several years, I've been doing my own trigger jobs. It's been pretty remarkable what you can coax out of a the factory system with the right little tweaks and the right spring swaps and everything like that. But when I learned Glock had a performance trigger, I was pretty excited about that because I've tried, the other manufacturers, the other aftermarket stuff out there, and I always found it lacking. Even if it was, marginally better than something I could put together, it was never really worth the price difference. When you can get 80% or 90% of the benefit at pennies on the dollar just with OEM Glock parts. Never found it really necessary to go out and buy an aftermarket system. So when I learned that Glock had their performance trigger, I was excited. Um, so I've had this now. Well, it's been several weeks. In that time, I've done a whole lot of dry fire training. I have shot one or two local matches, and I've done some live fire training on my own time as well. And to get the bottom line out there up front, this is good. This is really good. Uh, I recommend it. Um, I think it's a really good value at what they're asking for them. Um, and the side benefit being it's an OEM product. I think that gives you a little more confidence sometimes than going with an aftermarket product. So I know I feel that way. If at all possible, I try to stick with OEM. Even if it's going to be modified by me, I still have confidence in the Glock, like the fundamental Glock product. So let's take a look at this in depth. So looks like a Glock trigger bar assembly and trigger housing assembly, doesn't it? Well, the big difference is in a traditional Glock trigger mechanism. Okay, we have the trigger bar, and the trigger bar is attached to a cruciform, and the leading edge of this cruciform. I don't know if that's focusing for you. I hope so. The leading edge of this cruciform catches the leg of the striker. Okay, catches the leg of the striker, and what you're doing when you pull the trigger is you're cocking the striker. Okay, and that's built into your trigger pull. Well, in this new system, you can see there's not a cruciform there. It's just a trigger bar. You have the lateral part, but you don't have that cruciform. And what happens is, instead of cocking the striker as part of your trigger pull, that's no longer part of the equation. What happens is, let's call this, I don't know what Glock calls it. I'm going to call it the rocker mechanism. What happens is, when you pull the trigger, that striker is already pre-cocked, and the leg of the striker is sitting there on this sear. So when you pull the trigger now, all you're doing is rocking that assembly down, and then you're going to drop the sear below the leg of the striker until it's no longer engaged, and then boom. So essentially, big picture is that you're dealing with a pre-cocked striker now. So there are some benefits to your trigger pull, to having a pre-cocked striker. Everyone's gone to this in the industry. Some people have been there a long time. Springfield, the SIG guns, the 320s, they're all pre-cocked strikers. So, it's been said before, the Glock's behind the ball, having to cock the striker or load the striker as part of the trigger pull when the other manufacturers and other models of firearms pre-cock the striker. Well, I mean, it's worked so far. Don't mess with success. But I think some pressures from aftermarket, specifically Timney in the Glock world, may have forced Glock's hand in this matter, because Timney famously came out with their Glock trigger that featured a new mechanism, a new operation, which essentially gave the Glock a pre-cocked striker. I tried a Timney. It was okay. I wasn't crazy about it. I liked the trigger feel. I liked their trigger shoe. That was all perfectly fine. I did not have high hopes for the reliability of it. I didn't have any malfunctions due to the Timney myself, but after just a very few, certainly not 4 digits, well within the 3-digit range, trigger pull, dry trigger pulls, and live, I saw some evidence of striker drag, and so I said, I'm going to sell this thing. Wasn't really interested in taking a chance with the Timney. I kind of took it apart, took a look at it under the hood, so to speak, and just didn't have high hopes about the reliability. Now, that's just my opinion, and it's based on a very, very small sample size. So take that with a grain of salt. If you have a Timney and it works for you and you like it otherwise, rock on. Like, don't let me dissuade you. I'm just telling you what my experience was, and I had some misgivings about the reliability. So in any case, let's look at the differences between a standard or the old style. This is a Gen 5 trigger bar and trigger housing compared to the new Glock Performance trigger. And the trigger shoe itself, well, before we do that, this is what I was talking about with the Performance trigger, the lack of the cruciform. See, the function of this is just to push down on that rocker assembly and drop the sear when the trigger is pulled. Here, this piece actually catches the striker, and you're cocking it and then dropping off to release. But yeah, on the left, Performance trigger. On the right, standard Gen 5. So this is advertised, I think, as a flat trigger. And it sort of is, but it's also sort of not, because you see there's a flat part and then there's an angle off here. So it's a flat-ish trigger, whereas the standard Glock trigger shoe is definitely curved. Dimensionally, if you put them on top of one another, you'll see that they're not really different. Let's see if that can focus for you. They're not really different. Uh, you will notice here, let's look at them head on. I want to keep them straight, so I'm not left, right, left, right. You will notice, though, the standard Glock trigger shoe is pretty aggressively curved or radiused, like throughout the whole portion of the trigger. See that? This, instead, is flat, but it has a pretty aggressive bevel on either side. Now, functionally, it's pretty remarkable. So you can see, like, these are the same width. You could put a pair of calipers on them. They're gonna mic the same width, but it's remarkable. And the performance trigger actually looks thinner if you look at it head on. However, in the hand, like on the finger, in real time, it's remarkable how much thinner the standard feels on my finger. It feels very thin, especially going like straight back and forth between these two. This feels wider on the pad of my finger. I do like that because it makes it feel like I have more leverage and I can get a little more flat, if that makes any. And I'm gonna apologize for, yeah, I mean, my hands are dirty. I've been down here cleaning guns, but it makes it feel as if you have a more flat interface with the face of the trigger, if that makes any sense. So, you know, one thing we talk about is finishing flat on the face of the trigger when you're actually shooting, so that your sights are not disturbed and the bullet goes where you're aiming. So this definitely allows you to at least have the perception of finishing more flat, whereas, you know, it only makes sense. This has an aggressive radius. You know, you could be anywhere in there and it's really going to feel the same on your finger as you're shooting. But in any case, that's just something that really stood out to me, was the feel in the hand. But yeah, the other thing I like about this, not only the perception of greater width, is as a rule, I don't like flat triggers. I like curved triggers. Flat, it's always, you know, because it feels the same up whether you're up here, or I'm sorry, down here, or up here, or wherever in between. So, you know, it doesn't lend itself to a lot of consistency in where your trigger finger falls upon the face of the trigger. But with this one, the semi-flat design, I like that because my finger lands there, and due to that little angle, I find that I can be very consistent in my trigger finger placement. So it's increasing my consistency from shot to shot. I like that a lot. This is really the first flat-ish trigger that I've enjoyed, and I like it quite a bit. All right, I'm going to put this in an actual gun. We're going to do some head-to-head comparisons, see if I can show you some of the differences I've noticed. All right, we're back. Put the Glock Performance trigger back in the gun, and we're ready to do kind of a head-to-head comparison of the old style or the standard style Glock trigger and the Glock Performance trigger over here. Both of these are Glock 34 Gen 5 guns. This one is set up for production division with iron sights. This one is set up for carry optics. It has a full-length stainless steel guide rod, Trijicon SRO sitting on a forward controls design plate. It's got just a standard little plastic insert for the cutout there. Just makes mag changes a little bit easier. Silicon carbide grip job, of course, which is full of dead skin and pretty disgusting. plenty of my white grip goo as well. But anyway, let's get down to the triggers, which is what you came for. So, if you'll notice first, this is the performance trigger. This is how it sits in the gun. Pretty standard. So, watch where the trigger breaks. Well, it helps if it's cocked. Watch where the trigger breaks. All right. Pretty aggressive reset. Not as aggressive as standard, but if you're not riding the reset, who cares? You shouldn't be riding the reset because that's stupid. It's audible and all that. Again, that shouldn't matter either, but it's plenty aggressive. It's certainly more aggressive a reset than the Timney was. So I know that was a complaint. Whether or not it was valid, you know, it's for you to decide. But I think the trigger breaks pretty forward on this again, and I like that because, as I was mentioning with finishing flat, I think a lot of times the farther back it breaks, as in this, I think the less flat you can be, because I almost have this sensation of, here's where I want to finish, perpendicular, but here's where I'm actually finishing, right? So my finger is deep on the trigger, like up to that first joint, and I'm finishing back here. So I'm worried that I'm going to introduce some left pressures when I'm actually breaking that shot, which is absolutely what I don't want to do. I want to finish perfectly flat, the sight's perfectly aligned, so the bullet goes exactly where I'm aiming. Here, you can see it, and it may be a very, very small amount, like if you actually measured it. I'm not equipped to measure it, but if you actually measured it, but again, I have the perception that the trigger's breaking earlier, it's breaking sooner, allowing me to finish flatter. So I like that. Oh, the other really cool thing about the Glock Performance trigger, okay? So we all know, you know, the standard Glock triggers, you go once and you're done. So it's caused us to get creative over the years on how can we simulate a live trigger. So, you know, we've had rubber bands, we put cardboard, we have, in my case, a piece of paper towel in the ejection port just to keep it slightly out of battery, so that we can simulate a live trigger, but there's no resistance to that, right? It doesn't really simulate a live trigger to any degree, but it allows us, it has been good enough for us to do multi-shot exercises in dry fire. Now, the difference, this is a live trigger. Now, it doesn't simulate a break either, but there's a lot more pressure and it's a lot more realistic to an actual trigger press than this is, right? So this, to me, is a big benefit of the performance trigger. It's something I like a lot. I've gotten a lot out of dry fire with this. The range of motion is very similar to the live trigger press. You know, there's not any more over travel than there is in a live trigger press. So it's been really valuable for dry fire. You know, honestly, the thing is probably worth it just for that alone. Just so you don't have to like put something in the ejection port. It's probably worth it for that. Bottom line is, I like this a lot. I think it's good value for the money. It carries with it status as Glock OEM, so I have confidence in the reliability of it. Overall, I'm pretty impressed. My intention is to keep shooting this. I want several more thousand rounds on this, of course, before I use this at a major match, a match I care about. to me, I think that's just due diligence. But I expect good things, and I believe there'll be good things with this Glock performance trigger. And if it works out, the benefit is I won't have to spend my time every time I get a new gun, you know, doing everything I do. Like the old set screw video, um, it'll be nice to have a plug and play, throw it in and forget it option, so I won't have to do that, and trust that it's Glock OEM. That has another benefit for a lot of the shooting disciplines. I imagine IDPA. I know some of their divisional rules are more restrictive than USPSA's in recent years. So I'm kind of talking out my butt about this, so maybe that's not the case, but it may prove to be an option in some of the more restrictive divisions in different disciplines to have a factory option. IPSC too. I haven't really thought about that or read about it, but that might be a solution for Glock shooters in IPSC, if as long as trigger weight doesn't become an issue. I don't have a gauge because I simply don't care, so I can't tell you what the factory weight on this is. It doesn't matter to me as long as it feels good and breaks clean. So I have no idea what it weighs. It doesn't matter. To wrap this up, I'll tell you how I have this individual example set up, how I liked it. I tried it in a lot of different configurations as far as striker spring, connector, all the internals. There's not a lot to be changed on this, but I did play around with that, and I like the factory dot connector. I like the factory dot connector in general anyway, regardless of in the context of performance trigger or not. I think the dot is hard to beat. I tried a lot of minus connectors, 3.5 connectors, the Glock OEM minus connector, and like TTI, Lone Wolf, all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I think for you guys that like a rolling break versus some take up and a wall, if you like more of a rolling break, you may like to put a factory minus or an aftermarket 3.5 connector in this. It definitely does have that characteristic. I don't like that just because it's kind of mushy and creepy feeling. I'd rather have a little bit of pre-travel, a little bit of take up, and then a wall that I can pull through cleanly. So I prefer the dot connector. I also still prefer to run a 4.5 pound Wolf striker spring. I tried the OEM, the factory striker spring, and the 4.5 pound. It didn't make a lot of difference, but it made a small difference. So I'm going to stick with the 4.5 pound striker spring. The only other oddity I would point out, just in case, is I found that the performance trigger, for whatever reason, prefers a little heavier recoil spring. I typically, as a matter of course, run 15 pound recoil springs in my Gen 5 Glocks, and for whatever reason it doesn't want to pass the quote-unquote test quite as readily. It's just a little reluctant to go into battery sometime. I just cleaned that, so it's working fine now, of course, but at a match I had some issues where I don't know if I had some short stroking going on, or it just was reluctant to send the round into battery. Just a few malfunctions. I'm not ready to attribute that to the performance trigger. it could be any number of things. That's another reason I want to vet this for several thousand rounds before issuing the final verdict. But I found that if I put in the factory recoil spring assembly, it locked up like a bank vault, as you would expect. So it's just a little wrinkle that I've got to figure out with mating the correct spring rate of the recoil assembly with everything else that's going on here in the trigger assembly. So just something to look out for, just something to experiment for your own selves. But just be aware that the performance trigger seems to be a little different in what it expects out of the recoil spring assembly, because this is all a system and the system must be balanced. But when I popped in the factory recoil spring assembly, zero issues whatsoever. So that's it. This has gone on longer than I expected, probably longer than you expected. So I apologize about the length. I've just been talking and talking, but I hope you found this helpful. If not interesting, at least maybe helpful for you. But in any case, let me know what you think. If you've gotten your hands on the Glock performance trigger, let me know how you like it and whether or not you're going to stick with it. Tell me how many rounds you have through yours, if you've experienced any issues, or if you've had some success with it. I'd love to hear about it, love to talk about it. So this will be an ongoing thing, and I'll definitely catch you guys up once I've had a lot more rounds through this. So until then, thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.